This is the last of the notes pages for Ecology 2, Unit 3 in the Remote Biology. So take a minute and set up your paper. I'm going to move this around so I can see this. I may have to back it out just a little bit. There we go. So we're doing B11B. And Biology 11B says you're going to describe how events and processes, so describe how events and processes that occur during ecological succession can change populations and species diversity. So describe how events and processes that occur during ecological succession can change population and species diversity. So we're really talking about how does it mess with the biodiversity? How does it mess with biodiversity? So the first word we want to talk about is biodiversity. And biodiversity talks about the numbers of different kinds of species in an area. So the more diverse, the greater the biodiversity, the better things are. So the next word I want to talk about is ecological succession. Okay, so what is ecological succession? Ecological succession is a change in the species composition of a community following a disturbance. So somehow you've gone in and things have gotten screwed up in the ecosystem. So something's happened, things have changed, and so what's going to happen after that disturbance occurs? So you have a change in species composition of a community. So it's not just one population, it's the whole community. After or following some type of disturbance. And when I say disturbance, I don't mean a little thing. I mean there's some type of ecological disturbance that's happening here. And I'm going to put an or here. There's another way to think of it this way. Or it's the establishment of a community in an area that's barren of life. It's the establishment of a community in an area barren of life. Barren means there isn't anything. So think about new land, like from a volcano. Think about an area in Hawaii where it's actually creating new islands, new land. That is an area barren of life. It's never had life on it. And all of a sudden now, it's going to start slowly, things are going to start coming in and growing on there. So that's also considered ecological succession. Now we have two basic steps to that succession. And the first one is primary succession. And primary succession there's a focus on the vegetation, on the plant life, because really you have to have some plants there before the animals can move in. So this occurs where there is no soil. There's no soil, there's no dirt at all for them. And what happens is you have the simplest of organisms, plant type organisms that move into the area. And so you start with these organisms that move in. And so you start with something like a lichen, L-I-C-H-E-N. Really tiny, tiny little simple plant organisms. Lichens and mosses, they move in first. And then from that, after those they get established. Sometimes fungi will be in here too. Then what you have are grasses that slowly move in. Then you have shrubs. And so on until you get larger and larger organisms. These lichens and mosses are considered pioneer species. I'm going to put fungi in here too. These are pioneer species. They are the first ones to move into an area. So I'm going to put fungi under here because for some reason I didn't feel the need to write it in the box here. So lichens, moss. A lichen is actually a fungus and a moss that's kind of growing together. So we have these pioneer species. These are the first to move in, and they make soil. They're the ones that make the soil here. So it's a focus on vegetation. This occurs where there's no soil. These little organisms are the first to move in. These pioneer species move in. They're the first to move in, and they create dirt. They make the soil. Where there was none before, it's just barren rock, they make the soil. They break up the rock into little smaller pieces, and that's what their number one job is here. This is, of all the different types of succession, or different pieces in succession, this is the slowest. Because can you imagine something actually creating soil out of rock? It's going to take a while. Sometimes it's stuff that blows in, but most of the time it's these plants, these little bitty tiny plants. They can kind of hang on, they get enough water, a little bit of nutrient, a little bit of minerals and stuff, and then they die, and that dead part stays there, and then other ones grow in on top of it, and it slowly over time builds up layers and layers, and it starts to decay and rot, and that forms the soil that's there. From primary succession, the next thing we have is secondary succession. With secondary succession, you already have soil. So you already have an established community. You already have the soil, it's just disturbed. You don't have to start from bare rock. So there's already an established community, and what happens then is it's disturbed. Somehow something happens. Maybe there's a fire that rages through it. Maybe there's a plow that goes through it. I don't know, but somehow you have something that is disturbed. And this leads to a new community. If I can spell that. It leads to a new community developing there. Maybe it's really similar to what was there before, but more than likely it's got to start, kind of like it's taken it back several steps and it's got to start all over the place. It's a new community. So in this case, when you're talking about this, once it's disturbed, you have messed up the climax community maybe. So here we have a pioneer species where it starts, it moves in, and it's actually going to create the soil. What we have here, when we have this nice established community, we talk about a climax community. And the climax community is the final stable community. So this climax community, when you disturb it, it's obviously going to have some issues there. When you have this disturbance, it's generally going to progress from communities with lower species diversity, less stable, to communities with higher species diversity. So this whole succession, this ecological succession, goes from communities with low species diversity that means low biodiversity, to species with high biodiversity. Okay, so we start off with something. So once we've got this process where somehow it's either brand new soil being made or we've messed up an area, we've had some kind of disturbance. Ultimately, when it starts going, you're going to move from an area. It's going to move from a growth area where you have very little species diversity. It kind of looks all the same kind of species are moving in, and then it'll slowly get more and more and more diverse. And remember, the more diverse the community is, the more healthy it is. So when we have low species diversity, we have something that is less stable. Right here, this is less stable. When we have high species diversity or high biodiversity, we have something that's more stable. Okay? So again, this process is still slow. Don't think of, oh, what's going to happen in a year. Think of decades. Think of hundreds of years in some cases. So there are certain things that we talk about that are events that occur during this whole process of succession. So this next little piece we're talking about are events that occur during succession. Things that happen during succession. Okay. Now, the first thing is we're going to have decomposing pioneer plants that create soil. So I'm going to kind of repeat a little bit of this, but these bear repeating. Pioneer species decomposing. When you decompose the pioneer species, you create soil. The next thing is that when a fire burns through it, and fires are going to happen, fires are going to return nutrients to the soil, and that encourages succession. Fires are actually natural processes that occur. When a fire burns through it, they're going to burn through. A lot of times, things don't usually burn completely to ash, but it'll kill a lot of stuff. And when you kill a lot of stuff, all those nutrients are going to be returned back to the soil. So the fires return nutrients to the soil. And fires actually encourage succession. This is a good thing. Okay? There are some things, though, that limit succession. And these are things a lot of times that we humans do. Mowing. Oh my gosh, when you mow areas, that really limits the succession because you're limiting the number of seeds things that can seed out and form new plants and stuff. When you cut back the seeds, you're not going to have new things growing inside of there. So this keeps new species from moving in. And you know, if you have your front yard and you want a nice little grass yard, you do that on purpose. You tend to keep the other weeds, what we call weeds, out. So when we mow stuff, we keep new species from moving in. Farming. Farming really limits succession, because what we do when we farm, it creates a limited species diversity. And we humans, if we want to keep it that way, we have to continually work the land. So it creates a limited species diversity. And then anything could limit anything else. You could put a lot of different things in here. Anything that limits species diversity limits succession. So this last little piece in here, anything that limits species diversity limits succession. We want succession to happen. That is the natural order of things. So we want that succession to happen. So anything that limits that species diversity, anything we do that limits that species diversity is going to limit the succession of species through there. Okay, so we go back up to the top here, and we talk about the fact that you can describe how events and processes that occur during ecological succession can change the population and species diversity. Okay? So these things, it's all about the species diversity, the biodiversity. How does succession mess with the biodiversity? Well, as you first start out in a primary succession, you have very little species diversity. But as time goes by, these guys are going to create soil which allows for more species to move into that. So this process is allowing more species diversity to come in.